It's 5:30 in the morning on West 81st Street in Marshfield, and the block is quiet until it isn't. A black Cadillac cuts through the early dawn, gunmen jump out, and a storm of bullets echoes across Auburn Gresham. When the smoke clears, a Chicago rapper is left bleeding by the curb, his clothes soaked and his life slipping. The shooters peel off into the distance, leaving nothing but shattered glass and sirens. How did it reach this point? To understand this kind of ending, you got to go back to where it really started. This is the story of FBG Cash. Chicago drill rap has always been more than music because the lyrics are tied straight to the streets that raised the artists. When someone drops a disrespectful bar in this city, it usually means the shot is aimed at a real rival. And people in Chicago know those words can quickly spill into actual violence. Drill is raw because it speaks from lived experiences, but the same truth that makes it powerful also makes it deadly when beef is involved. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, Chicago's South Side had already seen drill become a wave, pushed into the spotlight by artists like Chief Keef and Lil Durk. The beats were heavy, the stories were darker, and the imagery was tied directly to gangs like the Black Disciples and Gangster Disciples. Once the music hit YouTube, the whole world tuned in. But for the people inside Chicago, the music was never just entertainment. Every song was a statement. Every name drop was a potential spark. And disrespecting the dead became a twisted way of flexing power. The split between O Block and FBG became one of the most notorious rivalries in that era. O Block sits right inside Parkway Gardens on 64th and King Drive, and it is Black Disciple territory with Lil Durk and King Von representing that side heavy. Only the Family, or OTF, was Lil Durk's movement that grew into a powerhouse, with Von becoming the storyteller who painted vivid pictures of their world. On the other side, you had Flyboy Gang from 63rd, aligned with the Gangster Disciples with rappers like FBG Duck, FBG Cash, and others holding their ground. That tension between 63rd and O Block was not just lyrical, because it was tied to bloodshed that had been going on for decades. When you look at how personal it got, you can't skip August 4th, 2020, because that's when Carlton Weekly, better known as FBG Duck, was killed in broad daylight. He was 26 years old when 4 masked shooters pulled up on Oak Street in the Gold Coast and let off 38 bullets in one of the most brazen Chicago hits ever seen. That killing shocked the city because it happened in an upscale shopping district, nowhere near the blocks people usually associated with drill violence. Federal charges later pointed to O Block members being behind the hit, showing how deep the war had crossed over from lyrics to indictments. For FBG, losing Duck meant losing their biggest voice and arguably their strongest rapper at the time. Not long after, O Block faced their own major loss when Davon Bennett, known to the world as King Von, was shot and killed in Atlanta on November 6, 2020. He had only been 26 years old, fresh off dropping his album, and was already considered one of the best storytellers in drill music. His death hit O Block like a bombshell because Von had been a leader, and the mural that later went up near Parkway Gardens became a sacred site for his supporters. The BDs were left mourning, but the anger was just as real, and those feelings never disappeared. So by the time both Duck and Von were gone, each side had lost a star, but instead of slowing down, the feud only grew hotter. Songs and social media became the new battlegrounds where both sides disrespected the dead, poked at wounds, and reminded everyone watching that Chicago drill was not like other rap scenes. Here, losing someone did not mean silence. It meant retaliation either in the streets or in the booth. Right in the middle of all this was Tristan Hamilton, the rapper the world would know as FBG Cash. He was not the most famous member of the crew, but he had been around from the beginning, one of the original members representing 63rd. At 31 years old, he had been in and out of prison on gun charges, so he was no stranger to the reality behind the lyrics. What separated Cash was his boldness, because after Duck was killed, Cash stepped into the spotlight and made himself one of the loudest voices left for the GD side. Cash saw himself as somebody who needed to carry that flag after Duck's murder. He was outspoken, he taunted enemies, and he was never shy about saying names, which in Chicago could be the same as drawing a target on yourself. At a time when the GDs were losing ground musically to OTF's commercial success, Cash embraced being that figure who would keep firing shots, whether in interviews, freestyles, or just posts on Instagram. That fearlessness earned him attention, but it also placed him right in the crosshairs of a war that had already claimed his closest homies. When you connect the dots, the Chicago drill scene wasn't just about beats and views on YouTube. It was about reputations and real grudges. O-Block had the momentum with Von's legacy and Dirk's superstardom while FBG was struggling after Duck's murder. But Cash stepped up to make sure his side still had a voice. And when you got two rival camps throwing disses back and forth, with so much blood already spilled, the stage was already set for another tragedy to play out. By early 2022, the beef between O-Block and FBG was hotter than ever, and everybody knew the energy was dangerous. The King Von mural stood tall at 64th and King Drive, painted on the side of a convenience store near Parkway Gardens. It was about 9 feet high, showing Von's face with a big smile and his O-Block chain hanging across his chest. Fans came from everywhere to take pictures. Tourists passed through just to see it, and the spot quickly became one of the most talked about places in Chicago. But in Chicago, a mural is never just paint on a wall because it carried weight and pride for the people around it. O-Block supporters treated it like sacred ground, and even police sometimes posted up nearby to prevent trouble. For Von's family and crew, the mural symbolized more than art. It was a reminder that his name was never leaving their block. The problem was, the same mural also represented a challenge to his enemies, because disrespecting it would be like spitting in the face of everyone tied to Von. FBG Cash knew all this, and he still made the move to show he wasn't scared of nothing. One cold day in early 2022, he walked straight into enemy territory, stopped in front of Von's mural, and threw up the middle finger for the camera. He posed in front of the 9-foot painting like he had no fear, with his face straight and his hand clear for the picture. To make sure nobody missed his message, he captioned the post with a line that cut deep. He wrote, "Whole world witness your main sniper get his scent splatted." That caption was a direct taunt at Von's reputation, because Von had been described by many as O-Block's sniper, a shooter with legendary status. By mocking that, Cash basically told the world that their strongest man got killed and nothing had been done about it. When the picture hit social media, the reaction was instant and heavy, because everybody knew exactly what that meant. On forums like Reddit, people were shocked, with one commenter saying, "On 64th and King Drive, right outside the O." That disbelief was shared across Instagram and Twitter because folks understood the risk Cash took just by standing there. In the street code, that kind of disrespect was seen as unforgivable, and the pressure for retaliation started building immediately. The OTF camp didn't stay quiet either, and Lil Durk stepped forward in the only way he knew, which was through music. On March 18th, 2022, Durk dropped a track called "Computer Murderers," and fans quickly pointed out who he was aiming at. In the song, Durk rapped, "Sneak dissing on the internet, talking about Von, like Lil Bro won't come out and spin." That line had people talking instantly, because everybody linked it to Cash's stunt at the mural. In Chicago slang, spin meant pulling up and shooting, so the bar was taken as a straight warning. Durk didn't stop there either, because the day before, on March 17th, he posted a story on Instagram that fans believed was aimed directly at Cash. DJ Academics reposted the clip with a caption saying Durk was dissing FBG Cash for taking the mural picture, and that fueled the narrative even more. Even if Durk didn't spell out Cash's name, people understood the message, and it wasn't hard to read between the lines. FBG Cash didn't back down. Instead, he doubled down and responded on the same beat Durk used for "Computer Murderers." He recorded his own freestyle, sometimes called "Back Again 2X," and in that track, he mocked Von's death again and even mentioned Durk's brother, D-Thang. One of the lines Cash rapped was, "Put your muscle in a wheelchair, I'm still here," which was taken as a jab at another OTF member. He followed it with, "The whole world witnessed your mans get splat and you didn't even get your lick back." That line cut especially hard, because it was like Cash was saying Von got killed in front of the world, and Durk still hadn't gotten revenge. In Chicago slang, getting your lick back meant retaliating for a loss. So Cash was daring them to act. That freestyle spread fast online, and people knew Cash was choosing to provoke instead of letting the tension cool down. In one of his interviews around that time, Cash added another layer to the story by claiming Durk himself had dared him privately. He told Adam, 22, on No Jumper, that Dirk sent him a message telling him to go to the mural and see what would happen. According to Cash, he replied, "I'm outside right now," and then went through with it. Whether that message from Dirk really happened or not, Cash wanted people to know he stood on his words. When he talked about it, he didn't sound nervous or regretful. Instead, he said it was risky, but that's the play he chose to make. He explained he posted it proudly, almost like it was a trophy. And for him, it was about showing he wasn't backing down from O Block. That kind of talk fit perfectly with his public image, because Cash had always carried himself like someone ready for whatever. For outsiders who only watched the beef through music videos and headlines, the whole thing might have looked like clout chasing. But for insiders who understood the street code, that picture at the mural was basically suicide. Cash didn't just disrespect the dead rival, he walked into enemy territory, put it online for the world, and dared the opposition to respond. The way Chicago was moving at that time, it was clear that kind of move would never slide without consequences. Not long after the stunt at King Von's mural, FBG Cash had a moment that felt like the streets giving him a warning. He was out late one night riding through Chicago with a woman by his side, and everything seemed normal until the silence cracked. Out of nowhere, gunfire ripped into the car, shattering the back window and filling the night with chaos. Bullets tore through the vehicle and Cash ducked down quick, barely missing a headshot that could have ended everything. He ended up with fragments in his arm, scraped but still breathing, a survivor of a setup that almost mirrored how he would later die. The fact that he made it out alive only added to the legend, but it also raised questions about who really pulled those triggers. Cash suspected it might have been connected to the woman he was with that night, because she had an angry boyfriend who kept calling her phone before the shooting. Some people even suggested she could have been part of a trap, leading him into an ambush. Whatever the truth was, Cash cut her off immediately after that night, refusing to take any more risks with someone who might have lined him up. That close call shook him for a moment, but when Cash talked about it later, he carried himself like it was just another day in Chicago. In one interview, he shrugged off the situation, saying straight up that death felt common for someone living his lifestyle. For him, surviving a shooting wasn't an extraordinary event. It was just part of the game he had been playing for years. Most people would take a scare like that and lay low for a while, but Cash didn't slow down. Instead, he went right back online, hopping on Instagram Live and sending taunts toward his enemies. He went live telling folks to pull up on me, making it clear he wasn't ducking nothing. It was his way of showing he wasn't intimidated, even though everybody knew the pressure around him was building heavy. Those close to him saw the danger clearer than he did, and one of the people who tried to warn him was Rico Reckless. Rico had been in the drill scene for years, knew how dangerous the streets were, and he tried to tell Cash straight up to leave Chicago behind. He got on a video call with Cash, urging him to head back to Houston where things were safer, but Cash didn't want to hear it. During that call, Cash leaned back with a Draco rifle in his lap, showing off the weapon like proof he was protected. He told Rico he was armed and ready, making it seem like the gun in his possession balanced the odds against whoever wanted him gone. It was classic Cash confidence, or maybe stubbornness, depending on how you look at it. Rico wasn't convinced, because he knew better than anyone that in Chicago, everybody is carrying. His response was blunt, telling Cash, everybody in Chirac got guns, reminding him that having a Draco didn't mean you were safe. Guns didn't guarantee survival in a city where setups and ambushes were everyday tactics, and Rico tried his best to get through to him. Cash listened but stayed firm, acting like he had it all under control. To him, leaving the city felt like weakness, and he wasn't trying to be seen as running from enemies. He felt untouchable, confident that his street smarts and firepower would keep him alive, even though the reality was proving otherwise. That near-death experience on the road could have been the moment to change his path, but instead, he doubled down and kept walking a line that was getting thinner every day. By early June 2022, FBG Cash was back moving around Chicago after spending some time down in Houston. He had been working on music projects there, trying to expand beyond the city, but the pull of Chicago always seemed to bring him back. Friends had told him to stay away, but Cash felt comfortable being home, even though everybody knew the streets were too hot. He had things in motion, including videos, songs, and talk of deals, so being in the city felt necessary for him. On the night of June 9th, rolling into the early morning of June 10th, Cash was out with a young woman. They spent hours moving around, and by the time dawn started creeping in, he was driving her home in his 2020 Ford SUV. The streets of Auburn Gresham were quiet at that hour, the kind of silence that makes everything feel normal right before it gets ugly. Cash was behind the wheel, and the woman beside him had already dozed off. It was around 5:30 a.m. when things flipped in seconds. As Cash drove near West 81st Street and South Marshfield Avenue, a black four-door Cadillac suddenly pulled up, cutting him off sharply. Before he had a chance to react, two men jumped out of the vehicle, one holding a rifle and the other gripping a handgun. It was the kind of setup Chicago knows too well, quick and precise, leaving no space for escape. The shooters opened fire immediately, letting off a barrage of shots that shattered windows and ripped through metal. The sound of rapid gunfire echoed through the block, waking neighbors from their sleep as nearly 24 rounds tore into the SUV. When investigators later processed the scene, they counted 23 shell casings scattered across the pavement, with 14 coming from a rifle and the rest from a handgun. It was clear this wasn't random shooting, but a planned execution, carried out with precision. Cash reacted as best as he could under that kind of ambush, trying to fight back while being cornered. Witness accounts and reports say he managed to grab his handgun and return fire at least once or twice, but he was heavily outgunned. The rifle's high-velocity rounds ripped into the SUV faster than anything he could answer with, and the imbalance was obvious. Despite firing back, he was overwhelmed by the storm of bullets crashing into him from close range. The young woman in the passenger seat was hit too, suffering wounds to her left arm and her back, but somehow she survived the onslaught. Her injuries were serious but not fatal, and she lived to later describe parts of the attack to investigators. She had been asleep when the shooting started, waking up only when glass exploded and bullets ripped into the car around her. Cash made a desperate attempt to escape, even after being hit multiple times. Reports say he tried to push open the door and run, stumbling out into the street while still clutching his weapon. He didn't get far because his body was already shutting down from the damage. Struck 13 times, he collapsed face down by the grass near the curb, just steps away from where the SUV sat riddled with holes. The gunmen finished their job quickly, then sprinted back into the Cadillac and sped off westbound down the street. The sound of their engine faded as neighbors stepped outside to see the aftermath of the ambush. Cash lay motionless while the woman cried out in pain, bleeding heavily but alive. Within minutes, police arrived on the block after being alerted by ShotSpotter technology and frantic 911 calls. They found the SUV stopped in the street with shattered windows and dozens of bullet holes marking the metal. Cash was lying on the ground in a pool of blood, unresponsive and barely holding on. Officers and then paramedics tried desperately to revive him, performing CPR right there on the pavement. Graphic cell phone video later surfaced online, showing EMTs pumping his chest repeatedly, trying to force breath and life back into him. His clothes were drenched in blood, and the urgency in their movements made it clear they were fighting against time. Neighbors could be heard in the background, some whispering that he had been hit in the head, others saying the chances didn't look good. The footage spread across social media, and fans were stunned watching the scene play out in real time. Cash was rushed to Advocate Christ Medical Center in Oak Lawn, a hospital familiar with Chicago's shooting victims. Doctors tried to save him, but his injuries were too severe after being struck 13 times. On June 10, 2022, at just 31 years old, Tristan FBG Cash Hamilton was pronounced dead. The young woman who had been with him survived after emergency treatment, recovering from her wounds, but left traumatized by the ambush. The precision of the hit had people instantly comparing it to what happened to FBG Duck nearly 2 years earlier. Duck had been taken out in broad daylight by multiple shooters using heavy firepower, leaving the street littered with dozens of shell casings. Now Cash was gone under almost the same circumstances. Two shooters using multiple weapons, spraying nearly 24 rounds with no hesitation. Both deaths carried the same signature of being well organized and cold, not random or sloppy. The scene on West 81st Street was another reminder of how dangerous the feud between O Block and FBG had become. Cash had mocked Von's Mural only months earlier, doubling down with diss tracks, and now he lay dead in a style that matched the violence he once rapped about. Neighbors would later describe how terrifying it was to hear that amount of gunfire so early in the morning, a reminder that the streets never really sleep in Chicago. Police described the crime scene as a targeted ambush, not a robbery or a carjacking. Cash's jewelry and belongings were untouched, proving the motive wasn't money, but revenge. Detectives picked up the shell casings and began their investigation, but no suspects were arrested at the scene. Whoever planned the attacks executed it cleanly, vanishing into the morning without leaving obvious traces behind. For people watching from the outside, it felt like a chilling repeat of a pattern. A rapper tied to FBG disses O Block, taunts their losses, and ends up murdered in the streets in a calculated hit. The cycle had claimed Duck in 2020 and now Cash in 2022, both gunned down with multiple shooters and overwhelming firepower. The drill scene had once again spilled out of the studio and into the streets, and this time it took another original member of FBG. The news of FBG Cash's death spread quick across Chicago, and by that same afternoon, every outlet had the story. ABC 7 and the Chicago Sun-Times both reported a rapper was killed in a South Side shooting around 81st and Marshfield. They confirmed he was 31-year-old Tristan FBG Cash Hamilton, and they noted a 29-year-old woman had also been shot but survived. For most of the city, it was another violent headline, but for the drill scene, it was a signal that the feud had claimed another name. Online, the speculation was immediate, and people tied his death back to the King Von Mural incident without hesitation. One headline even said, "Rumors are swirling that FBG Cash was killed because he posed in front of King Von's mural." On Twitter, comments rolled in, with some saying, "I bet he won't disrespect Lord Von and Dirk again." While others pointed out the irony of Cash's fate, the streets viewed it as the consequences of disrespect, the kind of outcome people had predicted the moment that picture went live. Inside O-Block circles, there were hints of celebration. Lil Durk didn't call out Cash by name, but fans caught subliminals in posts and lyrics that dropped shortly after the murder. In one clip, Durk was smiling and rapping about smoking someone, and the timing made people believe it was about Cash. That brought public backlash, including from Stephen Big Steve Jackson, the former NBA player known for being close to Chicago communities. He called out the culture of mocking the dead, saying, "All this talking about dead people online after they die, y'all suckers." His words carried weight, but inside the cycle of beef, they barely made a dent. On the GD side, the response was grief mixed with frustration. King Yella, another original FBG member who had moved to Las Vegas, posted a video after Cash's death. He hinted that a millionaire rapper had funded the hit, clearly implying Lil Durk had the money and power to make it happen. Yella told his followers, "Stop beefing with dudes with money," suggesting the war was uneven when one side had fame and resources fueling retaliation. There was no proof of a bounty, but the streets believed it because rumors of payouts had surrounded other murders like FBG Ducks in 2020. Despite the speculation, official justice never came. More than 3 years later, there have been no arrests or charges tied to Cash's murder. Police only called it a targeted shooting and gave little else to the public. That silence left the case cold, while his family and friends were forced to accept the street explanation that it was retaliation for the disrespect toward Von. The difference in law enforcement response was noticeable because while the feds aggressively pursued Duck's killers, Cash's case had no such pressure. For many, that confirmed the feeling that Cash's death would never see courtroom justice. The murder also underlined how dangerous drill culture remained. Chicago Sun-Times described it as a dark cloud over the city's drill scene, where artists often end up dead or in prison. Cash's taunts, live streams, and bold moves became examples used to warn younger rappers about the dangers of dissing dead rivals. His story was turned into a lesson, often repeated on forums. Disrespect in Chicago drill can get you killed, no matter who you are. The King Von mural itself, the spark for so much chaos, didn't even survive. By late 2024, the store owner had it removed after repeated vandalism and problems around the site. Police had described it as a magnet for trouble, and community leaders said it had become too risky to keep it standing. The mural had been a shrine for fans, but a target for enemies, and eventually it was painted over. For Cash, his story ended in a way that felt almost scripted by the streets. He was a man who stepped into the role of being one of the last loud voices for the GD side, and he carried that weight until his final day. He had a record deal on the table and even a baby on the way, but he never got the chance to see any of that future. His fate was sealed when he posed at Vaughn's mural, mocked the legend of O Block, and dared his enemies to act. In his own words, Cash once said, "Death is common." That line now feels like prophecy because he lived and died in a city where disrespect can mean execution. His name joined the long list of drill rappers taken too soon, tied forever to a cycle that has no end. So when you look back at the story of FBG Cash, the lesson is clear but heavy. A picture, a caption, and a few bars in a song were enough to turn him into a target. From that moment on, the clock was ticking. By June 10th, 2022, at 5:30 in the morning, the countdown reached zero.